From the first glance, Rhea knew she was in trouble. Not the professional kind. Not bullets, threats, or escape routes she could map with clinical precision. No, this was worse. It was personal, emotional, dangerous in a way she wasn't trained to handle. In a glass-walled penthouse 25 floors above New York, a woman in a silk robe and quiet indifference waited. Celeste Whitmore, heiress to the Whitmore Empire, one of the country's most private billionaires, and the reason Rhea hadn't slept in 3 nights. Not because of the job, because of the photograph. The file had hit her inbox 72 hours earlier, just before the agency flew her out from DC. Stamped with a single directive: private threat, high-value target, full discretion. Rhea had done her usual routine. Scanned the dossier, memorized patterns, built preliminary exit routes, and observed surveillance angles. But none of it prepared her for the photograph. Celeste Whitmore, caught candidly stepping out of a car, had tilted, mouth parted slightly in a smile that didn't seem meant for anyone but the camera. And Rhea had stared too long, felt too much. She chalked it up to exhaustion, to curiosity, to the eerie stillness in Celeste's eyes that didn't match the chaos of the world around her. But now, standing in front of her, Rhea couldn't deny it. She wasn't just here to protect this woman. She was already falling for her, and Celeste hadn't even spoken a word. "You're early," Celeste said, finally turning. Her voice was soft, like smoke across silk. Controlled, distant. Rhea straightened. "I'm never late. I didn't say you were. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments on a scale from 0 to 10. What score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference." Celeste poured herself a glass of something expensive without offering one. Her fingers were delicate, but her movement sharp. This was not a woman used to feeling unsafe. And yet Rhea was here, armed, watching, dying a little. "Do I need to be worried?" Celeste asked, raising one perfect eyebrow. "Would I be here if you didn't?" Rhea answered. Celeste smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "They said you were the best. They, the men my father pays to keep me alive." She sipped slowly. "You don't look like I expected." "And how's that?" Celeste's eyes flicked over her. "I thought they'd send someone with less collarbone." Rhea didn't flinch. "I'm here to do a job. And what a dangerous job it is," Celeste murmured. "Protecting a woman from shadows she created herself." Rhea watched her closely. "You think you created the threat, don't we always?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the city pulsed. Inside, something sharp settled between them. Not hostility, tension. Rhea had felt it before. In conflict zones, in shadowed alleys, in narrow corners before a job went wrong. But this wasn't about survival. This was about temptation. And it was accelerating too fast. "You'll be staying here," Celeste said, crossing the penthouse without glancing back. "There's a guest room. But let's not pretend you won't sleep light. I can scream if that helps. I'm trained for more than that." "I don't doubt it." She turned, eyes sliding over Rhea's again. "Tell me, Rhea, do you always fall for your clients this quickly? Or am I different?" Rhea went still. "That's not amusing." "Who said I was kidding? I don't fall for anyone," she cut in. "Not on the job." Celeste moved past her, their shoulders whispering as they brushed. "You already did." And with that, she vanished down the hall, leaving Rhea alone in a room that suddenly felt too hot, too bright, too empty. That night, Rhea stayed awake. She checked every window, reset the security feed, walked the perimeter twice, and still no threat showed. No calls, no breach, only silence. Even the air felt staged, like the building itself was holding its breath. Except for Celeste, who slipped in at 3:07 a.m. barefoot, wearing a black nightgown that slid off one shoulder, and asked, "Do you ever stop watching?" Rhea said nothing. She didn't trust her voice. Celeste didn't pause. "If someone tried to kill me, Would you take the bullet? Rhea stared at her without wavering. Even if I asked you not to. That's not how protection works. And what about feelings? Celeste said, stepping nearer. Do they work differently on this side of the gun? Rhea's mouth felt dry. I don't feel anything. You're a terrible liar. Celeste leaned in, her lips inches away. I'm not the danger you think I am. That's exactly why I'm here, Rhea breathed. Because you don't understand how dangerous you are. Celeste smiled. And yet you're the one with the gun. Then she drifted away again, melting into the dark hallway like a secret Rhea would never be permitted to keep. But it was already too late. Rhea was snared, and the real threat had nothing to do with bullets. Rhea didn't sleep. Not a second. She sat in the shadowed corner of the penthouse's main room, barely breathing. Every muscle held in stillness while the city flickered below. She'd pulled her hair into a tight knot at the back of her head, weapon at her side. Earpiece charged even though there was no team on the other line. Just her, just the quiet and Celeste. That woman, that impossible, arrogant, devastating woman. Rhea had worked with diplomats, tech moguls, arms dealers' wives, politicians who smiled with murder in their teeth, but never someone like Celeste Whitmore. Celeste who stripped her with a glance and then walked off like she hadn't done anything at all. Celeste who spoke like she was both playing and unmaking a game only she understood. Celeste who should have been a client, just a job, and was already somehow something else entirely. At 4:23 a.m., Rhea stood, walked the perimeter again, checked the locks, skimmed the security cameras. No movement, no signs, no threats, nothing. And still, her skin crawled. Her instincts were shouting, not because someone was coming, but because someone already had. Celeste had slipped under her skin, into her chest, someplace deeper. By 6 a.m., Rhea was in the gym on the lower floor, fists thudding into the heavy bag, trying to pound the thought of Celeste out of her bloodstream. It didn't help. Nothing helped. She lasted 20 minutes before she heard the elevator chime. Soft, deliberate. She turned. Celeste stepped into the gym like it was a runway, wearing a sports bra and leggings in deep navy. Hair pinned up in an effortless twist, eyes sharp despite the hour. I didn't know bodyguards came with apps, she said, picking up a towel and tossing it onto the bench. Rhea didn't answer. She kept hitting the bag. Celeste crossed the room slowly, watching her. Rough night. Standard night. I'm not used to being watched so closely. Then stay alive long enough to get used to it. Celeste tilted her head. Do you think I'm in danger, Rhea? I don't think, Rhea said flatly. I know. Celeste circled her. Not predatory. Curious. Like she was searching for the crack in Rhea's armor and savoring the hunt. You look tense. I'm always tense. Do you think about kissing me? The question sliced the air like a blade. Rhea stopped mid-punch. Don't. Why not? Celeste came closer. Because you're my bodyguard. Because you're not safe. Is that why you're protecting me? Or why you're resisting me? Rhea turned, grabbed a towel, wiped the sweat from her neck. I'm here to work. Keep pushing me, and I won't be. Would you really walk away? If I stay, someone dies, Rhea said, voice hard. Maybe you, maybe me. I'm not going to lose focus because you're bored enough to play seduction games. Celeste didn't blink. I'm not bored. I'm fascinated. There's a difference. Find someone else to fascinate. You're the one watching me sleep because someone wants you dead. Celeste's smile slipped for the first time. Just a flicker, a flash. But it was real. You read the files? Rhea nodded. All of them. Then you know it's not a matter of if. It's when. And just like that, the game shifted. Celeste dropped onto the bench, shoulders tight now, voice lower. My father's enemies aren't subtle. I've received 5 anonymous letters in the last 2 months. All postmarked from different states. All typed. No fingerprints. No traces. Rhea sat across from her. They were forwarded to the agency. You think it's just corporate sabotage? No, this is personal. Someone knows you wants you afraid. Celeste looked at her, really looked. I'm not scared, not of death, but I am tired of pretending I'm not lonely. The words hit harder than anything she'd said before. Rhea blinked. You live in a fortress, and yet I still sleep with one eye open. Rhea leaned forward. You're not alone anymore. You say that like it's a comfort. It is. Celeste stood, walked toward her slowly, carefully. Then, without warning, she knelt down, eyes locked on Rhea's. Do you think I'm the kind of woman who's easy to protect? No, Rhea said. You're the kind who makes people want to protect you anyway. Celeste reached for her hand, held it. For the first time, there was no flirtation in the gesture, just heat, contact, truth. And Rhea didn't pull away. A buzz interrupted them. Sharp. Rhea pulled her phone from her pocket. Unknown number. No voice. Just static. Then a mechanical whisper. You're too late. She's already marked. Rhea stood so fast. The bench screeched. Go upstairs now. Celeste didn't ask questions. She obeyed. Rhea was already scanning the room, eyes darting. She checked the cameras. No breach, no interference, just that voice, that threat, the kind that meant someone had eyes inside. And if they had eyes, they could be anywhere or worse, already inside. She locked down the elevator, sealed the stair access, sent an alert to the agency, and then she drew her weapon. Her heart pounded, not from fear, from fury. Someone had gotten close. Someone had dared, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Upstairs, Celeste waited. Rhea burst into the room, eyes sharp, scanning every corner. Did anyone come near you? No phone. Give it to me. Celeste handed it over. Clean. Rhea checked the windows. You're not leaving this apartment until I clear every inch of this building. I'm not afraid. Then you're an idiot. Rhea snapped. Because someone just told me you're marked. And they didn't mean for press. They meant for blood. Celeste stepped close again, voice low. Then don't let them take me. Rhea stared at her. I won't. Celeste nodded once, and for the first time there was no teasing in her eyes. Just trust. Dangerous, fragile trust. And Rhea knew in that moment she'd do anything to protect her. Even if it meant breaking every rule she'd sworn to follow. Even if it meant falling deeper into something she wasn't supposed to want. Because whatever this was between them, it was no longer optional. It was war. Rhea didn't eat, didn't sit, didn't blink for longer than necessary. The moment she secured Celeste in the lockdown bedroom and triple-checked every point of access, she returned to the security control panel and started tearing through every frame of footage. From the past 48 hours, the call had been too precise, too timely. Someone was watching. Someone had eyes inside this building. But how? This wasn't just a penthouse. It was a fortress. Rhea had already inspected the perimeter, the floors below and above, the elevator systems, the HVAC vents. Everything had seemed untouched, clean. Now it felt like a lie. Celeste was being hunted, and the game had just accelerated. She replayed the call over and over. That voice, distorted, but intentional. A whisper behind a wall. You're too late. She's already marked. Marked for what? A hit? A kidnapping? A message to her father? Celeste might have dismissed her own importance to Whitmore Tech as enemies, but Rhea knew better. Billionaire daughters weren't collateral. They were leverage, and someone wanted to hurt her. But what they didn't count on was Rhea. She didn't lose clients. She didn't fail. And she sure as hell didn't let someone slip past her without consequence. Rhea. The voice startled her. She turned. Celeste stood in the doorway barefoot, robe pulled tight. Her eyes were tired but unflinching. I told you to stay in the room. You didn't lock the door. I didn't think I needed to. You don't, Celeste said quietly. But I couldn't sit there. Rhea crossed the room into strides. You could have been exposed. You don't know how these people work. No, Celeste interrupted. But you do. So tell me. Tell me everything, because I'm not just some Aries waiting to be saved. I want to know what we're up against. Rhea hesitated. For a second, she saw past the silk and seduction. Saw the woman beneath. Brave, lonely, smart. Celeste didn't want protection. She wanted the truth. Rhea grabbed her tablet and brought up the files. 5 weeks ago, Whitmore cut ties with a private security contractor overseas. They were dirty, running surveillance deals on the side. When the company pulled out, they lost millions. And you think they're the ones threatening me? They're one possibility. There are others. Your name's been mentioned in at least 3 classified data leaks, all hinting at access points you might have had through your father's company. I never had access to anything, but you're still a symbol, and symbols can be broken, manipulated, exploited. Celeste was silent. Then she asked, do you think they'll come in person? If they wanted to rattle you, they've done it. If they want you gone, they'll come soon, and they'll be smart about it. So, we wait. No, Rhea said, we prepare. The rest of the day was a blur of movement. Rhea swept the entire penthouse again, checked every camera angle, replaced 2 devices that had signs of tampering. She requested backup from a secondary contact, but no one could be trusted fully. Not now. Not with the breach already inside the walls. By nightfall, Celeste hadn't left her side. She followed Rhea silently, watching her set traps, build alerts, move like a machine. But what Celeste couldn't know, was that Rhea was using the work to hide something much more dangerous than a bullet. Emotion? Longing. She couldn't stop remembering the way Celeste had held her hand in the gym, the way her voice had cracked when she said she was tired of being lonely. Rhea had tried to keep a wall up, but it was crumbling, and the closer the danger got, the more the line between duty and desire blurred. You haven't eaten, Celeste said softly from the kitchen counter as Rhea reassembled her weapon. Neither have you. I can't, Celeste admitted. Not when it feels like every breath could be my last. Rhea looked up. It won't be. How can you be so sure? Because I'm here. Celeste stepped closer. Do you always protect people like this? Like what? Like you care. Rhea's grip tightened on the gun. Don't read into it. Too late. Rhea stood, weapon secure. Go to bed. I won't sleep. Then rest. Come with me. The request wasn't seductive. It was honest, needy, real. Rhea paused. She should have said no, should have insisted on staying at the monitor. But something in Celeste's voice cracked her resolve. Just for a moment, Rhea said. Upstairs, the bedroom lights were dim. Celeste slid into the bed and left space beside her. Rhea sat on the edge, tension wound tight. You don't have to be stone all the time, Celeste whispered. You're allowed to feel not on the job. Then pretend I'm not a client. Don't tempt me. Celeste touched her arm. What are you afraid of? Losing control or wanting me? Both. Rhea turned to look at her, face in the low light. I can't protect you if I'm distracted. You're not distracted. You're human. Celeste's fingers brushed Rhea's hand. Let me remind you of that. And then softly she leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't swift. It wasn't reckless. It was a question, a vow, a limit, and a yielding all at once. Rhea went still, but only a beat, only a breath. Then she kissed back, just once, deep, grounded, painfully precise. Truly, truly careful. When they parted, both were breathless, and absolutely nothing else. That was a mistake, Rhea murmured. Then don't repeat it. I won't. Yet they both knew she was lying because some mistakes don't feel wrong at all. Outside, the city dozed, yet the danger edged nearer, and neither of them was ready for what came next. Rhea didn't stay in the bed. She couldn't after the kiss. Slow, deep, perilous in the way only restraint can be. She pulled away like her skin had caught fire and left without a word. her steps silent on the hardwood as she went down the stairs to the control room. She didn't glance back. She couldn't risk it. Not because she regretted the kiss. God, no. But because the moment she admitted it meant something, everything would tilt. And people died when Rhea let her guard slip. She knew that. She lived it. The following morning was quiet, tight. Rhea brewed black coffee, eyes fixed on the cameras, while Celeste appeared in the kitchen barefoot again, wrapped in a thin robe that revealed more than it hid. "No good morning?" she asked. Rhea stayed silent. Celeste leaned on the counter. "You kissed me. You kissed me. And you kissed me back." It was a lapse of judgment. Celeste scoffed. "That's the dullest lie I've ever heard. Do you want me protected or not?" Rhea snapped. Celeste folded her arms. "Do I need protection from you?" Rhea turned, gaze hard. "No, but you need to stop provoking me." "Maybe I'm not provoking you. Maybe I'm simply tired of pretending I don't feel anything." "Then pretend harder." The silence that followed turned thick, jagged. Celeste didn't push again. She left the kitchen without another word, and Rhea returned to her silent fight with herself. But the tension between them didn't loosen. It swelled, simmering under every glance, every stray touch, every breath they shared in the same room. And just when the air between them became unbearable, the real threat arrived. At 2:37 p.m., an alert flashed across Rhea's tablet. Movement on the private elevator. Unauthorized code. No ID. No override. Someone was inside the building. "Celeste." Rhea's voice carried as she sprinted up the stairs, gun already drawn. Celeste appeared at the hall's edge, confusion sparking across her face. "What is it?" "We have company. Go. Panic room, now. No time." Celeste didn't argue. She ran barefoot across the corridor as Rhea keyed in the code to open the secure room. Hidden in the wall, Celeste slipped inside and Rhea shut the panel, locking her behind the steel-reinforced door. "Stay quiet. Stay low." Celeste's voice was low through the comm. "Be careful." But Rhea didn't answer. She was already moving. Stealth, speed, accuracy. She reached the elevator access just in time to see the doors part and two men step out. Suits, clean cut. But the weapons beneath their jackets were obvious, if you knew where to look. Rhea didn't hesitate. She slid from the corner, gun raised. "Stop. Hands up." The taller one smiled. "Miss Maddox, we've heard you're skilled. Better than you. We're not here to fight. You're armed. Standard procedure." "You're not standard anything," Rhea growled. "You tripped the system. State your purpose or I shoot first." "We're here to deliver a message to Celeste. To you." He took a small envelope from his inner pocket and slid it across the floor. Rhea didn't move. "Push it closer." He complied. She lifted it slowly, one eye still on both men. Inside lay a single card. No words, just an emblem. A wolf's head etched in silver ink. Her heart stalled, not from fear, from memory. It was a brand from her past, from the years she never spoke about. The years she spent overseas in places the world forgot. "Who sent you?" she asked, voice like steel. "Someone who remembers who you used to be." Rhea stepped forward. "You need to leave now." The man didn't protest. He smiled again, mocking, amused. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Rhea's pulse spiked. "Say her name, and I'll put a bullet in your skull. We'll be in touch." They left as softly as they arrived. Rhea stood alone, the card still in her hand, her breath thin. She had told herself those years were behind her, that the mercenary life she'd buried would stay buried. But the wolf's head meant one thing. Someone from her past was watching, and now they wanted her back. She released the panic room an hour later. After sweeping every inch of the floor again, Celeste emerged pale but steady. "Was it them?" "It wasn't just about you," Rhea said, voice distant. "What does that mean?" "They didn't come to kill you." "Then what?" "They came to wake me up." Celeste looked at her for a long moment. "Who are you?" Really? Rhea shook her head. Someone I don't want to become again. Celeste stepped closer. Tell me no. Why? Because if you know, you'll never look at me the same. Too late. Here. Right now. Today. Celeste said. I already see you. And I'm not afraid. Rhea's breath caught. You should be. Celeste reached out, her fingers grazing Rhea's. You think I'm fragile. I'm not. I don't care what you did before. I care what you do now. Rhea pulled away, jaw tight. What I do now is protect you, nothing else. That's a lie. Rhea stepped back, then let it be. But the damage was done. Celeste had seen something she wasn't meant to see. And Rhea knew now the threat wasn't just about Celeste's family or Whitmore Tech, it was about her. Her past, her sins, her enemies. They were coming, and they weren't after Celeste. They were after Rhea, which meant Celeste wasn't just a client anymore. She was a target because of Rhea, and the only way to save her might be to disappear. But Rhea didn't know how to walk away from her. Not anymore. Rhea didn't sleep that night either. But this time, it wasn't because of duty. It wasn't even because of fear. It was because she couldn't stop thinking about the look on Celeste's face when she asked, Are you really? And she didn't have an answer. She could say aloud it was easier when it was just a job easier. When Celeste was a puzzle to solve, a perimeter to guard, a contract to fulfill. But now everything was shifting, cracking, unraveling. And for the first time since Rhea left the shadows of her old life, she wasn't sure who the threat really was. The ghosts behind her, or the woman who'd made her heart start beating again somewhere around 3 a.m. She sat alone, in the dark at the edge of the penthouse balcony, staring out at the city lights, fingers clenched around the silver card. The wolf's head glinted faintly under the moonlight. It wasn't a symbol of intimidation. It was a signature. A mark from someone who knew her from before, from the life that ended when she disappeared, and changed her name from the unit they used to call the Iron Shadows. The team that took impossible contracts in impossible places and made sure no one survived long enough to tell the story. She'd walked away from all of it after everything went to hell, after two operatives died, because of a call she made under pressure. And now here it was again, clawing back into her life. Through the weakest place, her feelings for Celeste. She heard soft footsteps behind her, didn't turn until Celeste was close enough to touch. She wore a dark sweater over silk shorts, her hair down, eyes tired but steady. You don't sleep, she said softly. Rhea didn't respond. Celeste sat beside her, close enough for her bare knee to brush Rhea's. Was it you? She asked. In that past you won't talk about, were you the monster they needed? Or the one they sent to kill the monster? Rhea stared out at the city both. And now Rhea looked at her finally. I'm trying to be someone else. You already are. Not if they come back. Then we fight. You don't understand what they're capable of, Celeste. These people, they don't just kill, they erase. They burn through lives like they're disposable. And if they know you matter to me, then let them know. Celeste's voice was sharp, now unyielding. I won't be hidden or used or left behind. Not because of something I didn't choose. You don't get to protect me by pushing me away. That's not love. That's fear. This isn't love. Rhea snapped, then froze, her own voice like a knife in the cold silence. Celeste didn't flinch. No, she said. It's not just love. It's obsession. It's need. It's the only thing that's felt real to me in years. And you're scared because you feel it, too. Rhea stood, suddenly backing away as if distance could protect them both. I should leave, she said, but her voice shook. I should call for a replacement. Do it then? Celeste rose, eyes burning. Run if that's easier than staying and feeling and being seen. Rhea turned away, but Celeste crossed the space and grabbed her wrist. Tell me you don't want me, she demanded. Say it to my face and I'll walk away and never bring it up again. Rhea said nothing. Say it, Celeste repeated, voice trembling. I can't, Rhea whispered, finally, and Celeste's breath caught because it's not true. Rhea looked at her, and every part of her body was screaming to stay still. to not touch, to not cave, to not lose control again. But her hands were already moving up to Celeste's waist, pulling her closer, their bodies pressing together like magnets with no will of their own. I should let you go, Rhea said, but I can't and I won't. Then stop pretending, Celeste whispered before their mouths collided again. This time there was no restraint, no pretense, no waiting. The kiss was deep, rough. Rhea pressed her back against the wall, hands and her hair fingers on bare skin. Their hearts thundered in unison. And it wasn't careful. It wasn't strategic. It was a crash, a collision of everything they'd been holding back for days. Maybe longer. They didn't make it to the bedroom. The living room floor became the place where silence broke, where touch replaced words, where the danger outside paused. Just long enough for them to forget the world and remember what it was like to feel human. When it was over, neither of them moved for a long time. Just breath and warmth and the soft sound of the city through the glass until Celeste murmured, "You're not going anywhere." And Rhea knew she couldn't even if she wanted to later. Rhea sat on the edge of the bed, shirt half buttoned, staring at the symbol again. The wolf's head. It wasn't just a message. It was a signature. It meant someone wanted her back. Not to finish a job, but to pay for walking away. Her burner phone buzzed once. No caller ID. She answered without speaking. A familiar voice came through, cold, confident. "You've been out a long time, Rhea. But you know how this works. You took something that doesn't belong to you, and we don't like debts unpaid." Rhea gritted her teeth. "She's not yours." "No, but she will suffer just the same if you don't come back in." "What do you want?" "You already know what we want. We want you on the next plane to Prague. We have an asset. We need you to remove you. Do this, and we wipe the debt clean. You refuse. And well, collateral damage doesn't mean much to us. You remember how that works, don't you? I'm not one of you anymore. You'll always be one of us, Rhea. No matter how many times you try to sleep it off in someone else's bed." The line, when dead, Rhea sat frozen, the past dragging her back like chains around her chest. She turned her head slowly. Celeste was asleep, her bare back rising and falling with soft, steady breath. She looked peaceful, untouched, but Rhea knew that peace was a lie. They wouldn't stop, not until she either complied or died, or worse, dragged Celeste into a hell she didn't deserve. And for the first time in years, Rhea felt powerless. Not because she didn't know how to fight, but because for once, she had something to lose, and she had no idea how to protect her from this. Rhea didn't tell her about the call. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even as she stood at the window hours later, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass. With Celeste's arm wrapped around her waist and her voice soft in her ear saying, "Come back to bed." Rhea couldn't lie, but she couldn't tell the truth either, because the second she did, everything would change. And she couldn't bear the thought of seeing fear in Celeste's eyes. Not fear of the world, not fear of the threat, but fear of her. So she stayed quiet and let the silence hold them. But inside she was already splitting her mind, racing through every possibility, every angle. If she refused the mission, they'd retaliate. Not through her, but through Celeste. If she accepted, she'd be pulled back into the darkness, into the blood, into the person she used to be. And maybe she wouldn't come back. Maybe she wouldn't want to come back. And if she disappeared, would Celeste ever understand? Would she hate her? Would she mourn her? Or worse, wait for her? Rhea felt sick, not with fear but with helplessness, because for once violence wasn't the hardest part. Love was. Celeste noticed the shift. She always did. She studied Rhea like a language she hadn't learned yet, but understood intuitively the way her hand lingered too long on her gun, the way her eyes swept every room even tighter than usual, the way her jaw tensed when the phone buzzed. Even if she didn't answer, she didn't ask right away. But Rhea felt it building until finally, 3 days after the call, Celeste stood in the middle of the room wearing nothing but a long t-shirt and defiance in her voice and said, "What are you not telling me?" Rhea looked up from the maps she laid out on the table, scouting exits, routes, contingencies, and said nothing. Celeste walked over, pulled the paper from her hands, and waited. You said you'd protect me, but I can't feel safe if you're disappearing in your head every hour. Tell me what's going on. Rhea stared at her chest rising fast, eyes full of fire and fear and stubbornness, and finally exhaled slow. They want me back. Who? Rhea didn't answer, so Celeste tried again. Who is they, Rhea? What kind of life were you running from before you met me? Rhea sat down suddenly, her body folding like something too heavy to keep upright. I used to work for a unit. Not the military, not official. Something off books, off grid. We were ghosts. We did what governments couldn't claim and cleaned up what they couldn't afford to expose. As we took contracts they don't put on paper, and when I left, I wasn't supposed to survive long enough to remember them. Celeste sat too slowly. Why did you leave? Rhea's eyes met hers. Because I killed someone who didn't deserve it. Because I realized I wasn't protecting anyone. Just erasing people for money and orders and fear because I couldn't recognize myself anymore. And now they've tracked me down again. And they want me for one last job. Celeste's voice stayed low. And if you refuse, they'll come for you. Celeste didn't waver. She nodded. So, what's the assignment? A hit in Prague. Some diplomat with too much intel and the wrong enemies. It's not about you. It's just pressure. They know if they threaten you, I'll fold. Say yes. Are you going to? Rhea looked aside. I don't know. Yes, you do, Celeste said, reaching for her hand. You're not that woman anymore, the one who says yes to orders she doesn't believe in. I don't know if I can keep you safe if I stay. You definitely can't if you leave, Rhea swallowed. I thought walking away would keep you safe. But now I think walking toward you is the only way to quit running. Then stay, Celeste said. We'll find another path. And in that breath, Rhea believed her. She believed that maybe love could speak louder than war. At least for once, for both of them, truly. That maybe the past didn't have to claim her. But the world didn't care about faith. The world only cared about leverage and pain and power. And at 2 a.m., it proved it brutally. Glass shattered. The night split like a wound. First a sniper round punched the corner window inches from Rhea's head. Then the lights died. Then the silent alarm Rhea had linked to her phone buzzed once. Twice enemy breach. She grabbed Celeste by the waist, dragged her down, drew her weapon in one smooth motion, and crawled across the darkened room, their breaths tight and fast behind moving shadows. Rhea didn't pause. She fired once at the doorframe, then rolled them both toward cover, whispering, "Stay down, stay down, stay down," into Celeste's ear, her own heart pounding like a war drum. Two silhouettes slipped into the room, one quiet, the other sloppy. Rhea dropped the second. One quick, clean shot center mass. The first slid behind a pillar. Tactical. Trained. This wasn't a random strike. It was personal. Rhea knew the cadence, the angles, the discipline. It was one of theirs. One of the ghosts she used to run with. The first man stepped out slowly. Voice familiar to familiar. "You've gone soft, Rhea. Since when do you hide behind civilians?" Rhea didn't answer. She only fired 3 times, driving him back, then called over her shoulder. "Panic room. Now. Go." Celeste hesitated half a heartbeat too long, and Rhea snapped now, and Celeste ran. Rhea moved fast, low, using the quiet between gunshots like footsteps. She circled the intruder, came up behind him, and didn't hesitate. Her elbow cracked his jaw, her knee, his ribs. He reeled, then countered fast. Their bodies collided in brutal, practice tempo. Rhea recognized him. Cole Mercer now, one of the old unit's enforcers, never clever but loyal and cruel. He grinned as he swung at her. "You really fell for the princess. I thought you didn't get attached." Rhea kicked him hard, and when he dropped, she didn't stop. She hit him until he wouldn't move again. Her hands shaking, her knuckles bloody, her breath sharp. She swept the remaining space, cleared it, then sprinted to the panic room, opened the door, and Celeste flew into her arms, holding her like glass. Blood or fear didn't matter, only that Rhea was alive, only that they were together. Rhea held her tighter than she ever had and whispered, "I'm not leaving. I'm not giving them anything. Not this. Not you." And Celeste nodded against her shoulder. "Then we fight together." And Rhea knew then it was too late to run, too late to hide. The ghosts were here, and they wanted blood. But for the first time, Rhea wasn't afraid, because she wasn't standing alone. Celeste didn't sleep for 2 nights after the assault, not because she feared dying, but because for the first time in her life she realized how easily Rhea could be taken from her. She'd built walls all her life, steel and wit and distance, crafted an identity no one could pierce. But now everything felt fragile to human, too much, like spun sugar meeting rain. And Rhea wasn't just the woman who guarded her. She was the woman Celeste would die to protect, too. The morning after the ambush, air tasting of credite, Rhea sat in the living room corner, bruised, mute, wrapped in ice and steel and guilt like armor. She refused to speak for hours, only watched the feeds. Field stripped her weapon, and stared through Celeste like seeing her too clearly might break her. "Talk to me," Celeste whispered, crouching beside her. "I need you to say something." "You could have died," Rhea said without looking up, "because of me. But I didn't. Not this time." Rhea's voice cracked for the first time, and Celeste leaned closer until their foreheads touched. "I'm not afraid of being with you, Rhea. I'm afraid of losing you without even having the chance to fight for you." Rhea's breath stuttered. "I don't know how to stop them. Then we hit first. It's not that simple. No. But it's the only option left, the sharpest edge among bad choices." Rhea looked at her then, really looked like she was seeing a partner, not a civilian. Like she finally accepted she wasn't in this alone, and she nodded. "Okay." They spent the next 3 days preparing. Rhea's contacts were thin, but not gone. She called in every quiet favor she had left, changed burner phones twice, locked down the penthouse, and relocated Celeste to a secondary location, a safe house Rhea had never used before. For anyone else it was small, barely furnished, hidden in Brooklyn behind a decoy bookstore, the kind of place ghosts used to disappear. Rhea installed cameras every 3 feet. Armed sensors ran tactical drills with Celeste made her shoot. For the first time, Celeste hated it. Hated the recoil, the sound, the weight. But she did it because she refused to be helpless. Rhea watched her in silence, half in awe, half in panic. Celeste didn't flinch, even when her hands shook. She pulled the trigger like she meant it, like she meant to survive. And when she missed, Rhea took her hands in hers and whispered again. After a week of silence, they got another message. Not a voice this time, just a photograph delivered through a drone. Small silent dropped through the open window of the safe house. It was a picture of Rhea as a teenager, blood on her face, crouched over a man's body, gun in hand. It wasn't one of the official kills. It was personal and old and buried. Celeste stared at it, then at Rhea, who took it slowly and said nothing. "Who is he?" Celeste asked quietly. "Someone who deserved to die," Rhea said, and there was no regret in her voice, only fact. "They're trying to remind me what I was. And what are you now?" While Celeste asked, and Rhea's voice softened. "Yours." That night they didn't touch. They just lay in the same bed facing each other, breathing slow, hearts sinking like a language. Only they knew the quiet between them wasn't fear, was intimacy. Rhea traced the shape of Celeste's mouth with her eyes and whispered, "I want to keep you safe more than I've ever wanted anything. Then let me protect you, too," Celeste said, and kissed her lightly like a promise, like a beginning. And Rhea kissed her back like an answer, like finally letting go. The next day, Rhea made the call, not to the ghosts, but to someone else, a name she hadn't said in years. "Nova called her," she said when the voice picked up. "I need extraction. Not for me, for someone else." "I thought you were dead," the voice said, dry, and amused. "Close enough." "What's the target?" I need to disappear with someone without anyone finding us ever again. You're in love. Don't mock me. I'm not. I'm impressed. What's her name? Celeste Whitmore. A long pause. Jesus, Rhea, you really don't do anything halfway. Can you help us or not? I can, but it'll cost you everything you have left in this world. Done. Nova Calder's voice softened. When do you want out? Soon, but I need to draw them out first. Finish this before we vanish. You're setting a trap. I'm done running. Rhea hung up and turned to Celeste, who had heard everything and didn't look away. Do you really want to disappear with me? Rhea asked, and Celeste smiled faintly. I'd rather be nowhere with you than everywhere without you. The next step was riskier than anything they'd done. Rhea let one of her locations leak on purpose, fed false data through a dormant channel and waited. They stayed in a third hideout, this one deep in the Hudson Valley, a cabin with no heat and barely any reception. Rhea wired it. Anyway, every window covered, every step calculated. They stayed close. Celeste reading by the fire, Rhea cleaning her gun, both pretending this was normal when it wasn't. When it would never be normal again. But maybe that was okay. Maybe they were done with normal. Rhea kissed her again that night. Not like desperation this time, but like grounding, like choosing her with both hands, like telling the world she didn't care. Who came next? The trap was set. The ghosts were coming. And this time, Rhea wasn't going to just survive. She was going to end it. The night before the trap sprung, the cabin was quiet. Too quiet for Rhea's nerves. Too quiet for Celeste's thoughts. But they didn't fill it with words. They filled it with presence, with soft glances and warm touches, with the comfort of shared breath and promises unspoken, but understood because they both knew what was coming. They both knew this was the last calm before everything either ended or began. And Rhea kissed Celeste that night like it might be the last time, not with desperation, but with reverence, slow, aching, full of everything she'd never been allowed to feel. And Celeste kissed her back like home, like certainty, like she wasn't afraid anymore.